Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our podcast. Today, I'm with Mr. Prasanna Shanmugathas, who is a Canadian scholar and a legal expert. He's graduating with his Juris Doctorate degree next year from Windsor University, University of Windsor. And Prasanna has been an activist and advocate for peace and prosperity and pluralism in Sri Lanka. And I'm glad to have Prasanna with us. Can you introduce yourself, Prasanna, for the viewers who don't know you, or you are? I cannot say that they don't know you. You are very much active, but for the new viewers, explain, introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you, Kagusthan Ariaratnam. Yes, my name is President Sanmugadas, and I'm a writer and I'm a filmmaker. I've written primarily on human rights abuses in Sri Lanka, as well as Canadian foreign policy issues. I've also recently released a documentary titled Neelan Unsilenced, which focuses on the life and legacy of Dr. Neelan Tiruchelvam. And I'm here today speaking with Kagusthan Ariaratnam, who is a defense analyst and who has recently written a book called Spy Tiger, the O5 File, a child soldier turned double agent. Uh, would you like to further elaborate for the listeners about yourself?
Yes, my name is Kagusthan Ariaratnam, but I go by Stan. I have many aliases, and I will stick to Stan for now, being time being. I was a former child soldier who was forcibly recruited by the Tamil Tigers when I was 17 years old out of high school. After 5 years of ordeal and nightmares, I had to confess my affiliation with RO, whom I provided information while within the LTTE. I spied for India's research and analysis wing because of the personal relationship that went out of Tamil Tigers code of conduct. I was blackmailed by the Indian intelligence to provide them with intelligence. I eventually confessed my betrayal to the Tamil Tigers as a punishment. The Tamil Tigers reverse engineered Rose's tactics and strategies and sent many people back to New Delhi and Colombo. I was one of them who was sent to infiltrate the Sri Lankan military. After working with the military, I was able to leave Sri Lanka, and I'm currently based in Ottawa, Canada. And I have written a book about my memoir that portrays my story from my time with Tamil Tigers and my uh, ordeal and nightmares and redemption, resilience, how I survived. And I end the book in a cliffhanger because I'm writing a second book. The first book is The Spy Tiger, the O5 file, and I'll start with another O5 file series. I'm proposing another book about my Canadian experience with the Canadian immigration, Canadian agencies, Canadian Human Rights Commission. It's ongoing and the story is timeless. So while I was working for after my defection from the Tamil Tigers to the Sri Lankan security forces, I was promised by the then Defense Minister, Mr. Anudrudha Radwat, and Sri Lankan military commander of Sri Lanka's military, General Rohan Daluvacha, as well as General Srilal Veerasurya, that if I cooperate with them and obliterate the Tamil Tigers once and for all and help facilitate that, they will provide a 13th Amendment plus a federal setup for the Tamil grievances they will address. On that promise, I worked with them for 14 years from 1995 to 2009 until the Tamil Tigers were militarily obliterated. But these promises were never kept, as all the broken promises for the Tamil grievances that never has been implemented. So this is where we are coming to talk about Prasanna's documentary, where Dr. Neelan Tiruchelvam also advocated for a federal solution. During my time, during the Operation Revirasa, President Chandrika Kumaratunga approached this politically and militarily, because the political side of the proposals put forward by President Kumaratunga was drafted by Dr. Neelan Tiruchelvam, and the military side, we were advancing to capture the Jaffna Peninsula from the Tamil Tigers, recapture Jaffna Peninsula. So this was the same time I was with the military, and Dr. Neelan Tiruchelvam was with government side. I was a prisoner of war at that time, and I was an informant for the Directorate of Military Intelligence of Sri Lanka. So, can you, Prasanna, explain how Dr. Neelam Tiruchelvam's proposal uh, was acted as an answer to the Tamil grievances? How his proposal was designed, and what is his role, and how important that role played? The documentary you described as being particularly urgent due to its release at a pivotal moment in Sri Lanka's politics, with President Kumar Dissanayaka's government holding a supermajority and having made campaign pledges that mirror Dr. Tiruchelvam's vision. Given the lack of visible momentum on constitutional reform, what impact do you hope to achieved by this documentary that will have an on the current political landscape and the public's perception of their leaders' promise?
Yes, so the proposals that Neelan advocated, it's important that they came at a time. The proposals, the initial proposals called the Union of Regions proposals, they were released on August 3rd, 1995, and they came at a time where Sri Lanka, prior to then President Chandrika Kumaratunga having just recently come into office, Sri Lanka had 17 years of UNP rule, under which the Tamil minority community, they were victims of a bloody pogrom, Black July. They were victims of numerous atrocities committed by the singular majority community, such as the burning of the Jaffna Library, which resulted in numerous ancient Tamil artifacts and documents that dated back of hundreds of thousands of years. It was the richest library in terms of literature in the whole of South Asia, arguably, and that was just decimated, which many in the documentary Neelan Unsilenced, we talk about this, and a commentator says that he viewed it as a sort of cultural genocide. And also, you also had the Indian peacekeeping forces come in, and they were committing massive atrocities against Tamils in the north, raping many Tamil women. Estimated 1,000 Tamil women reportedly were raped every single year. The Indian peacekeeping forces were in the north. That's the reported number. The unreported is probably exponentially higher. So you had all these atrocities, and then here comes this new leader who is fairly politically new within the national stage of Sri Lankan politics, named Chandrika Kumaratunga, and she comes into office saying that we need a political solution in order to address the grievances faced by the Tamil community. The Tamil community have been subjected to decades-long discriminatory policies, and they have legitimate grievances. This is the first time a political leader at the national level who's running for president has articulated the grievances of the Tamil community in a very clear manner. And so she was very much determined to introduce constitutional reforms that would address the grievances of the Tamil community and that would bring a peaceful end to the civil war. And Neelan Tiruchelvam was a constitutional scholar, a lawyer who was educated at Harvard Law School, who built institutions in Sri Lanka, such as the International Center for Ethnic Studies and the Law and Society Trust, both institutions which are still standing in Sri Lanka more than 40 years later. And he built institutions that were dedicated to scholarship on pluralism, on democracy within diverse societies. So Chandrika Kumaratunga saw Dr. Tiruchelvam, given his uh, uh, background in constitutional scholarship, as somebody very poised to help the government in terms of formulating a new constitution for the country. So she initially, when she came into office, she brokered a ceasefire with the LTTE to end hostilities, and this ceasefire was reached in January of 1995. And unfortunately, the LTTE broke the ceasefire in April of 1995, citing that the Kumaratunga government did not fulfill its pledges to fully lift the embargo that the previous government had imposed on the north of the country, which was preventing a lot of goods from coming into the north. So Pravagran in April 1995 broke the ceasefire, and the government and the LTTE returned to fighting. And despite that, President Kumaratunga was determined to bring forward a new constitution for the country. So, in an attempt to resuscitate talks, she released in August 3rd, 1995, the Union of Regions proposals, which Dr. Tiruchelvam played an instrumental role in drafting.
Can you break us down about the Union of Regions Tiruchelvam trying to address?
Yes, so the Union of Regions proposals, why that was so significant is it resulted in fundamental restructuring of the Sri Lankan state as we know it. Sri Lanka, uh, as it was known then and as it's still known now, is a unitary state. And a unitary state means that power is consolidated at the center. And within Sri Lanka's construction of the unitary state, whatever powers the unitary state devolves to the region with one hand, the state can unilaterally take away with the other. And Sri Lanka's current power sharing mechanism comes from the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which was uh, forcibly imposed on Sri Lanka as a result of India's intervention during the Indo-Lanka Accord, where India militarily deployed its peacekeeping troops as a way to bring forward an end to the civil war and bring forward a political solution. It resulted in then President J.R. Jayawardenna agreeing to the 13th Amendment, which resulted in a power sharing structure whereby provincial councils would be set up, and you would have something called a national list of powers, uh, a regional list of powers, and something called the concurrent list, whereby whatever powers the concurrent list, whatever powers would be shared by the center and the regions, those are joint powers. But really, the power sharing mechanism in Sri Lanka is whatever powers are devolved from the center to the regions can be unilaterally taken away under the guise of national policy or with a 2/3 majority. So, such a power sharing structure within a unitary state was fundamentally incompatible with the grievances of the Tamil community, because the Tamil community would be at the mercy of the Sinhala dominated central government, because whatever powers the Sinhala dominated central government has devolved to the regions, they can then unilaterally take away. And such a unitary state, such a flawed power sharing mechanism was not only detrimental to the Tamil community, but also to the Sinhala leaders in the various regions across Sri Lanka. So, such a power sharing mechanism was both a grievance for both Tamil leaders and Sinhala leaders. So, what the Union of Regions proposals did is it did away with the unitary state, and it sought to make Sri Lanka a union of regions, whereby powers would be devolved from the center to the regions, and the regions would have their own independence in terms of being able to exercise powers and not have those powers be unilaterally taken away by the center. There were checks and balances put in place within the Union of Regions proposals that would prevent the central government from unilaterally taking away those powers. There had to be levels of concurrence whereby the governor appointed by the central province need to have the concurrence of the chief minister, and the chief minister need to have support of the local government. So you had these checks and balances that made it very difficult for the central government to then come in and unilaterally take away whatever powers devolved to the regions. And in the proposals, you also had a mechanism by which, if there was ever a dispute in terms of powers that should be devolved from the center to the regions, there was a form of arbitration that would be done by all the leaders of the various regions across Sri Lanka. The proposal sought to split Sri Lanka into uh, regions, 8 autonomous regions, and the ministers, the chief ministers, the governors of those various regions would then have to form a consensus in terms of whatever powers with the center, in terms of whatever powers would or would not be devolved in when it came to disputes. And the proposals also sought to do away with the executive presidency. So, in terms of the proposals, also sought to give autonomy in terms of land, in terms of financing, in terms of policing. These are some of the most contentious issues. And the proposals devolved the powers from the center to the regions and put in these checks and balances that I mentioned, which made it very difficult for the central government to unilaterally take away those powers. So, getting back to your initial point that you made, now Sri Lanka has a new government in power, the which is led by President Anura Kumara Dissanayake, who ran on an election platform of bringing forward a new constitution to Sri Lanka, and the Center for Policy Alternatives documented his promises. And one of the promises that he made during his presidential campaign is that he promised to bring forward a new constitution to Sri Lanka that would abolish the executive presidency, that would devolve power from the center to the regions, giving the regions a degree of autonomy. And a lot of these promises mirror the same the provisions that were advocated by Neelan Tiruchelvam in the proposals that he worked on for the Kumaratunga government. And what's so significant about President Disanayake's government is they have a supermajority in parliament, which means they have a 2/3 majority in parliament, which means that they are able to bring forward a new constitution to Sri Lanka, and they have the correct number of votes to be able to pass a new constitution into Sri Lanka with a greater than 2/3 majority, with a supermajority in parliament. And the problem that Neelan Tiruchelvam and the government, the Kumaratunga government had was they did not have a 2/3 majority. They needed to get votes from the United National Party. And the United National Party, as we discussed in the documentary Neelan Unsilenced, they were unwilling to give votes to the Kumaratunga government because they did not want the Kumaratunga government to be given credit for ushering in a bold and progressive constitution into Sri Lanka. Ranil Wickremesinghe, then the leader of the United National Party, refused to give President Kumaratunga the credit for bringing forward a new constitution to the country, so the proposals didn't get passed, and the LTTE was fundamentally unwilling to negotiate with the Kumaratunga government, thereby not imposing the needed pressure on the UNP to also negotiate with the proposals in sincerity. So given those factors, Neelan's proposals, despite being the boldest and most progressive proposals to date ever put forward by any government, they were unfortunately unable to be passed. So now we have a significant opportunity with the Dissanayake government to bring forward to Sri Lanka a bold and progressive constitution that is inclusive and that is not majoritarian or centralized, as is the current constitution of Sri Lanka. So we have a golden opportunity, and that's why I released the documentary now, because Neelan Unsilenced, the documentary on the life and legacy of Neelan Tiruchelvam, it educates the viewer on the flawed nature of the unitary state of Sri Lanka, and also educates the viewer on the bold and progressive constitutional reform proposals that Neelan sought to implement, sought to end the bloody civil war and address the grievances of the Tamil people.
The backdrop and setting the stage for the our discussion about Neelan's documentary, Neelan Unsilenced documentary. I want to ask you this: the film uses archival footage and interviews with those who knew Dr. Tiruchelvam. And can you explain and describe how, the process of unearthing and selecting this material to resurrect his voice and vision, and what specific moments of the interview were most crucial in telling his story? Because I also not only watched 2 3 times your movie, the film, and I also saw the Facebook page you brought back Neelan's voice in a the Neelan resurrected. It's like he never silenced. He never unsilenced. It's a timely and relevant film for today's status quo. Given the status quo, uh, this film calls for a urgent need to put forward a federal setup, autonomy, regional autonomy, like Dr. Neelan Tiruchelvam advocated for. So, can you just explain how the process of unearthing and selecting this material to resurrect his voice and vision, how that film just does justify for this?
Absolutely. So, in terms of how I went about telling the story and resurrecting the footage, to help tell the story of Neelan's life, Neelan was born in 1944 in Ceylon, present day Sri Lanka, British Ceylon. In 1944, in 1948, the British had left Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka became a dominion, quote unquote, became an independent country. And so Neelan was very much, he was born and brought up in Sri Lanka just as Sri Lanka was about to gain independence, and he saw the very early uh, discriminatory policies that were being put forward by the Sri Lankan government, the Sinhala Only Act, and the pogrom, the 1958 riots, and the 60s and 70s, the ethnic riots. So Neelan very much grew up in Sri Lanka during the time when its ethnic problems were rising to the forefront. So the way that I sought to tell Neelan Tiruchelvam's story was very much through the lens of the history of Sri Lanka's ethnic problems. So
Personal part of the larger story of Sri Lankan conflict. Yeah.
very much so. So Neelan's Tiruchelvam's life and history very much parallels with Sri Lanka's ethnic problems. That was just a very fortunate coincidence. So the way that I begin the documentary is I begin it through Neelan Tiruchelvam's father, through understanding his political legacy, which is that Neelan Tiruchelvam's father was a senator. It
Murugesan Tiruchelvam.
Kagusthan Ariaratnam, that's right. He was a senator within the Dudley Senanayake government, and he was a minister for local government. And Neelan Tiruchelvam's father, he was Neelan Tiruchelvam's father and Neelan's family. They were based in Colombo, Sri Lanka. They were a very affluent family, and Neelan Tiruchelvam's father was very determined to bring forward a federal solution to address the grievances of the Tamil community. He was a staunch.
In fact, Murugesan Tiruchelvam and Amadalingam Joheswaran are the three people who drafted the Vatukota resolution itself. You know,
Yes,
Murugesan Tiruchelvam is one of the core architect of drafting the Battukota resolution with Amadalingam and Yogeshwaran. And even though Senanayagam was the mastermind of Battukota resolution, the three lawyers who drafted the constitution, the Battukota resolution, is Murugesan Tiruchelvam, Amadalingam, and Yogeshwaran. You know, unfortunately, it is irony that the Tamil Tigers now say that their political grievances are based on the blueprint of what got a resolution, but they assassinated the old people, very people who drafted the solution, the resolution, what got a resolution.
So the Butter resolution, it was a sort of a demand for the town people to have a separate state, given the long-standing grievances of the Tamil community. So Senator Murugesan Tiruchelvam was actually uh, during his entire political career, he was a staunch opponent of a separate state. When he was a senator, he gave speeches saying that uh, we, the town people, have no intention to divide the country. We do not want to divide this country. We want to live alongside the singular people. We've lived here for thousands of years, and if need be, we will fight to defend this country. So that was a very popular speech that he gave in the Senate when he was being accused by Sinhalese colleagues of advocating for separatism when he wanted to advocate for federalism. Uh, and when the Vadakota resolution came about, actually, Senator Tiruchelvam was opposed to it. He vocalized his grievances in a polite way to his elder SJB Chavanagam, who was the leader, the civil rights leader for the Tamil community. SJB Chavanagam, by this point, had given support to a separate state, but we make it clear in the documentary Senator Murugesan Tiruchelvam was a staunch opponent of a separate state, as was his son Neelan Tiruchelvam. Both of them actually uh, uh, were staunch proponents of federalism, and so the way that I sought to really narrate Neil Thurtom's story was initially to discuss his father's legacy as being a proponent of federalism and trying to work with this government that was not accommodating or recognizing rather the grievances of the Tamil community. And when his efforts failed to bear fruit, Neelan Tiruchelvam, very much having witnessed his father's efforts and having witnessed the discriminatory policies and the riots against the Tamil community, Neelan Tiruchelvam then took the mantle and began uh, advocating for a federal solution. And so the way that we told the story is very much paralleled with the trajectory of Sri Lanka's ethnic history, and we cover the burning of the Jeffrey Library, the 1983 riots, and Dr. Tiruchelvam was present in Colombo during the 1983 riots, and we also then talk about the Indo-Lanka Accord, and Dr. Tiruchelvam had his criticisms of the Indo-Lanka Accord, and we then bring forward the Kumaratunga government. And finding the archival footage was certainly a challenge because this is decades and decades prior. So it took a long time. And also finding footage of Dr. Tiruchelvam speaking footage was also very difficult too. We have a bit of speaking footage of Dr. Tiruchelvam in which he articulates the need, he articulates the grievances of the Tamil community, and he repeatedly emphasizes, the sanctity of life, how valuable and how precious life is, as the Tamil people are being slaughtered by Sri Lankan state-sanctioned violence, and also as a result of its war with the Sri Lankan government and the LTTE's atrocities. Dr. Tiruchelvam is repeatedly emphasizing the sanctity of life, how we need peace, and how we need to come to a peaceful solution in order to achieve democracy. And you hear him say those words. And so the way that I went about finding the footage, it was very much paralleled with Dr. Tiruchelvam's life, which began just as Sri Lanka's ethnic problems were beginning itself. So that's how I went about.
So let me ask you, the documentary states that Dr. Tiruchelvam's commitment to finding a solution within United Sri Lanka rather than through armed struggle ultimately cost him his life. What role do you think or do you see the documentary playing in countering the narrative that separatist agenda were the only path forward, and how do you hope it reframes Dr. Tiruchelvam's legacy for younger generation, today's generation who may only know him as a victim of political violence? Because many Tamils in the diaspora, Tamil circle, and even in Sri Lanka, people have mixed feeling of about Dr. Tiruchelvam, because they might be thinking the reason why he was assassinated, because the ardent supporters of the Tamil Tigers, who are sympathizers, they view Tiruchelvam as a traitor. So I was wondering if you can explain how do you hope it reframes Dr. Tiruchellam's legacy for the younger generation who may only know him as a victim of the political violence.
Absolutely, and the younger generation, the millennial generation, the Gen Z, that generation are very much unfamiliar. More so, the Gen Z are very much unfamiliar with who Neelan Tiruchelvam was, and they very much see if they're Tamils, they very much see the ethnic conflict through the lens of Prabhakaran, who was the leader of the LTTE, and so they support a separate state. But the problem with support for a separate state is what Prabhakaran wanted was a separate Tamil state, which was ethno-nationalist, in which Tamil people were supreme. And anytime you have a state which is founded on ethno-nationalism, you automatically have a state in which one group reigns supreme over the other. And if you have a state in which one group reigns supreme over the other, you're going to have a state which is going to become dysfunctional, because the minority group will have grievances which will not be addressed, and those grievances will fester and fester, and then violence will erupt. And we've seen that time and time again. We saw that in Sri Lanka, where the Singla people sought to reign themselves supreme as a result of grievances they had under British colonial rule, where the Tamils were given preferential treatment. And so the Singla group sought to reign itself supreme and sought to implement legislation and discriminatory policies, and the grievances of the Tamil community festered and festered, and we saw civil war. And in Pakistan, you have a sort of religious nationalism where Islam reigns supreme, and you have these minority groups that have grievances, and there are various problems within Pakistan. And India, for a long time, was regarded as the example of a pluralistic sort of federal society where different religious groups can coexist. But under Modi, we see a Hindu nationalism that has become so toxic and like a virus infecting the nation. And we see the grievances of Muslims and the grievances of the Sikh community, and all these grievances festering. And so anytime you have a state which is ethno-nationalist, religious nationalism, those kind of nationalist states where one group is supreme over another, will fundamentally result in a state that's dysfunctional. And that's why Dr. Tiruchelvam was such a firm proponent of communities living together in peace. It's the only solution which is viable. There is not a single country in the world, not a single country in the world that supports a separate state for the town people. There's not one. And so the repeated consensus within the international community, among the world leaders, the US, Canada, the European Union, is for a political solution under a united Sri Lanka. In the case of Canada and India and Norway, they explicitly have advocated for a federal solution. And so the political grievances of the Tamil community can only be addressed through a federal solution for the country. And it doesn't have to be labeled federalism. Neelan's proposals do not are there. You won't find the word federalism in the entire political package, the constitutional reform package.
Union of regions, right?
Yes. So, Pakisoti Sarvanamuthu, an academic, when Neelan's proposals were released, he labeled it as federalism in all but name. So, what we need is a new constitution for Sri Lanka, which does away with the unitary state, the centralized, majoritarian nature of Sri Lanka's current constitution, and seeks to devolve power in a meaningful way to the regions, and devolves it in such a manner whereby those powers cannot be unilaterally taken away by the central government, as is currently the case, where the powers, whatever powers are devolved or given with one hand, could be taken away with the other. And that's repeatedly the language that people that we interview for the documentary, like G.L. Pires, Rohan Edersena, the constitutional scholars in Sri Lanka at that time, and even now, that's the language that they use to describe Sri Lanka's current political structure, whereby powers devolved to the regions with one hand and can be taken away with the other. So we need a new constitution for Sri Lanka, and we have the opportunity now with President Dissanayake, who's pledged to bring forward a new constitution to Sri Lanka, who has a supermajority in parliament to really enact a new constitution. So what this documentary seeks to achieve is to educate the Sri Lankan public about the flaws of the unitary state, what Neelan's proposals advocated, why they're so significant, and why we need those kind of proposals, why we need Dr. Tiruchelvam's vision again in order to bring forward a new constitution, and why President Dissanayake should really consider Neelan's proposals as being the boldest, and to being a blueprint in terms of redressing the grievances of the various communities in Sri Lanka, not just the Tamil communities, but also the Muslim communities and even the Sinhala communities as well. As given that the current political structure in Sri Lanka, given its majoritarian nature, the chief ministers in the Sinhala regions across the country, they're very much unsatisfied because whatever powers is devolved to the regions, to their regions, could be unilaterally taken away by a central government, which might be opposed to whatever interests they have. So the current political structure in Sri Lanka is fundamentally unworkable for Tamils, Sinhalese, and Muslims. So there's consensus in that we need a new constitution. And Dr. Tiruchelvam's is the boldest and progressive in terms of addressing the grievances of all the communities in the island.
Thank you. Thank you for explaining this. I think that what we need today in Sri Lanka is peace and pluralism and a toleration, a concept of toleration, moderation, and coexistence, as envisioned by Dr. Neelan Tiruchelvam. I want to ask you a last question. According to the documentary's website, the film is a non-profit educational documentary. What do you hope viewers, particularly students and academics, take away from the film? And what specific educational or discussion material have you developed to support its use in academic setting? I mean, Neelan's film is not just a Sri Lankan story; it's a larger story of the world longing for the pluralism. So I was wondering, he worked not only in Sri Lanka, he's also worked in Kazakhstan and some other part of the regions of the world, in South America, I believe, so, somewhere.
Yes. So, what I hope viewers take away from the film is that Neelan was somebody who repeatedly emphasized the sanctity of life, and you hear him say those words in the documentary. You see and hear him say those words, the sanctity of life, how valuable life is, and that was one of the final speeches that he gave in Parliament before his assassination in July of 1999. A 1 month prior, he talked about how valuable life is and how we should preserve life and how we should do everything we can uh, uh, to bring up forward peace within Sri Lanka, so that life is precious and preserved. And so, right now, as we're seeing the war in Ukraine, we're seeing Gaza being slaughtered. Dr. Tiruchelvam's value of the sanctity of life is so important, And Dr. Tiruchelvam was somebody who advocated for democracy and for coexistence, as you mentioned, not only in Sri Lanka, but also in other countries. In the documentary, we talk about how Dr. Tiruchelvam was a consultant for Kazakhstan, as Kazakhstan had just broken up from the Soviet Union, and Kazakhstan was trying to bring forward a constitution for its newly independent country. And Kazakhstan's leader, President Nazarbayev, he reached out to Neelan Tiruchelvam. His people reached out to Neelan Tiruchelvam to provide consultation and recommendations for what their new constitution should have. And Dr. Tiruchelvam repeatedly, within his recommendations, he emphasized how whatever Kazakhstan constitution has, it must have protections for the various communities in the island, whereby their languages, their right to speak their language is protected, their right to practice their religion, their right to associate freely, their right for freedom of expression. So his ideology in terms of how communities should exist in a plural society was very much informed by what he saw in Sri Lanka in terms of the ethnic conflict in Sri Lanka, and the lessons that he took away from Sri Lanka in terms of how various communities need to coexist. He brought that to Kazakhstan, and he also brought that to Chile. We also cover this in the documentary when Augusto Pinochet, the Chilean dictator, he had agreed to a plebiscite in which Chile would either go forward in terms of a democratic elections, or his Pinochet's rule would be extended. And Dr. Tiruchelvam was a election monitor in Chile to monitor the plebiscite. And Dr. Tiruchelvam saw Chile transitioning from a dictatorship to a democracy. And Dr. Tiruchelvam's values was for societies to coexist with fundamental civil liberties and rights for all people. And so I think that's what viewers should take away, which is that Dr. Tiruchelvam was a fundamental proponent and advocate for democracy, not only in Sri Lanka, but also in various regions across the world as well.
Yeah. Thank you for explaining all this. I also would like to add that the
Also, I also want to briefly mention that some of the material that we have to address the second point of your question. On the website of the documentary, neelanunsilenced.com is where you can watch the documentary. And on the website, we have a tab that says, Who is Neelan? And it has a mini biography of Neelan. And below, you'll see a link to Neelan's proposals, the text of Neelan's proposals, as well as Neelan's scholarship and literature discussing Neelan's proposals. So that's something that viewers can read about. And we also have a link to Neelan's his parliamentary speeches. A book comprising of Neelan's parliamentary speeches was released by the International Center for Ethnic Studies, Neelan's institution. So we have a link to that as well. So that's something viewers can also read as well.
thank you. It is really a resurrection of a man who sacrificed his life for the peace and pluralism in Sri Lanka, and a great role model for all of us. To lot to learn from him. And do you like to share anything else about it, or we close it yet, or what do you think?
Yes, I think it's a documentary that can resonate with Sri Lankan people, but also people all over the world that are fighting for democracy, that are fighting for the rights of minorities, that are fighting for pluralism and coexistence within diverse societies. So the documentary has resonance not only to Sri Lankans, but also to people all over the world, as we see conflict in Gaza and Ukraine, where the rights of people are being challenged by authoritarian dictatorship and the flagrant violation of the rule of law. So I think with that, I think we can close the this episode of the.
Next episode we will be discussing about the project O5 and my memoir Spy Tiger O5 file, and we conclude here and see you next time.
Thank you.